Well, here we are, guys. It's the end of the year. It's your final project. And even though it's listed on Odysseyware and Google Classroom as part of your last unit of our curriculum, actually your final project is more about the idea of history and how we make sources than it is actually the topics you've been learning about. So one of the most important things we know from history is how we use sources to study history. And we've spent the last 9 months looking at things that have happened in different parts of the world or in the United States through the historical lens, things that have happened in the past. And how we know about what happens in the past is through sources. And primary sources and secondary sources are two of the things that authors, historians, teachers, textbook writers, all of these different people use in order for us to learn about what happened. And so we're going to use that idea for our final project. So primary sources are documents, images, or artifacts that provide first-hand testimony or direct evidence of a historical topic or event. It's basically the things that we use in history to look at what were the people who really lived during that time experiencing. So if it's the American Revolution, we would be looking, a primary source would be a journal that an actual, colonist wrote during the Revolution. Or it would be a document that was actually from that time period. And so that's what a primary source is. And so you live history all of the time. Every day is a part of history. And the last year plus since March of 2020 has been a really challenging and interesting time in American history. And so I want you to consider how you can be a historian and look at primary sources. So are there a lot of examples? So I put the definition right here on your instructions, and I gave you some examples right here for you to consider. And remember that primary sources are first-hand accounts. They can be biased because they're obviously what one person experiences, but it also provides an opportunity for people in the future, maybe 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 2,000 years from now, they will look back at primary sources and say, well, that was what it was like in 2020. And so that's what you're going to do. So since March of 2020, you've lived through a historical event. You've lived through historical events lots of times in your life, but we're going to focus on COVID-19 because that's had the biggest impact historically in your life right now. So I want you to think about what you will share with your children and your grandchildren when someone will say to you, what do you remember about 2020 and 2021 and COVID-19? What are you going to tell them? What will you show them? What will you pull out of a box in your closet and say, look at this? And someday you'll be in a museum and they'll have a whole display. And what will be the artifacts that they have? Well, they'll be like, this is what it was like. So that's what I want you to think about. And you are going to develop 2 primary sources and submit them about your experience with COVID-19 during the last year plus. So you need to read carefully what a primary source is and the examples. And then your task is to showcase 2 original primary sources of your own experience during COVID-19. So you will create 2. I gave you some examples right here. If you have another example that you'd like to use, please just let me know and just sort of check with me so that I know that you're kind of pointed in the right direction and you don't submit something that's not a primary source. But for example, you could type in a little journal or a diary entry. Maybe it's the day we were all sent home from school, Friday, March the 13th, 2020. Or maybe it's a journal entry from today or from last week or from whenever it is you would like to record what it was like that day about what was happening with COVID-19. You could do an audio or a video recording. Right here, go to Flipgrid. I put an example on Flipgrid of my own, but you can just record something. No other students will have access to your recordings. So you could just submit a recording of you talking about what you experienced. So that's a possibility. You could take a photograph of an artifact, something that you have that you would want to share with someone later in life about what it's like. And then you'll include like a little description about what it is and how it relates to COVID-19. You could use a historical photograph. In other words, a photograph taken by someone else that shows like a part of the history with your own description of what it is and how you would remember that time period. You could write a letter to someone else. Maybe, it's a letter that you had written to your aunt or your cousin or someone else at the time about your experience. So you're going to do 2 primary sources. If it's a written primary source, you'll just put it in a Google Doc and you'll submit it to Google Classroom. And you could have 2 written ones, or you could have a written one and a photograph, or you could have 2 recordings. It's any combination of 2 primary sources. So if it's written, put it in a Google Doc and submit it to Google Classroom. If it's a photograph, then insert it into a Google Doc and put your written descriptions and submit that into Google Classroom. If you're doing the audio or the video recording, you'll just submit that to Flipgrid and you'll just use the link. So I gave an example on Flipgrid, so you can watch that if you'd like. I also put an example here. So as most of you know, I like to use Bitmojis on my assignments for you guys, just to kind of, make it a little more friendly. And even the Bitmoji world has been COVID-19 for the last year. So I put I inserted my example, and then I put my description down here about what is my experience and what does this tell us about what it's been like to live during this time of COVID-19. If you have questions or you need any help with the assignment, please reach out and let me know. I'd be happy to help you. And I hope you look at it and come up with some great examples. And I'm excited to see what you have to share. Thanks everybody for all of the work you've done. I really appreciate it. And I hope I get an opportunity to see you in person really soon. Take care, guys.